Today I'm here to help you master the Azure Image Builder, and there is a lot to cover. Azure Image Builder is a service in the Azure cloud that offers unification and simplification of your image building processes across Azure and Azure Stack. And it does this with a fully automated imaging pipeline. And no matter if you're working with Windows or Linux, you can use AIB to manage your existing images in a cloud-based pipeline or use it to build new images. You can integrate it with your existing security configurations, patch management with Linux or Windows updates, install applications, agents, tools, and more. And that means you can manage your existing golden images as well as images taken right out of the Azure Marketplace. And now AIB supports Windows Virtual Desktop environments. You could use AIB to create images for any VM size, from the little burstable VMs up to the GPU-powered monsters and everything in between. Image Builder will integrate your new images into the Azure Shared Image Gallery, which will help you with versioning your images, managing multiple replicas within a single region, duplicating your images across multiple regions, multiple Azure subscriptions, and also multiple Azure Active Directory tenants. And don't forget, like I said earlier, about Azure Stack as well for your disconnected and highly secure Azure environments. Images with AIB can be deployed in multiple ways, including an Azure DevOps Build pipeline, PowerShell, Azure ARM templates, and if you caught one of our latest episodes on desktops in the cloud, where Daniel showed off the up-and-coming Azure Portal integration of AIB. So we've got a completely packed agenda for this session, so let's get started. So what's the value of Azure Image Builder and why should you care? Well, lots of customers have challenges in creating custom images, and that's because image creation is a specialized skill set. You need to know the operating system very well. You also need scripting and application packaging and layering, as well as skills in deployment tools. And this is especially true in the case of Azure, where you need to know how the cloud platform works so that you can create and deploy your images. And if you're creating and building those images at scale, you're going to need a very well-defined process and pipeline so that you can automate everything and do those images month to month or quarter to quarter. And this is the problem that Azure Image Builder is here to solve. By describing your custom images within a template and passing that to a cloud service that handles the automation and complexity of all of that for you, it makes building images really easy. Now, the Azure Image Builder is currently in preview, but what that means is that today there are some preview restrictions. So here is the list of all of the regions that currently support Azure Image Builder, and more will be coming very soon. And here's the list of supporting operating systems, and if the one that you're interested in is not on the list, go ahead and give us some feedback over at Tech Community or in the comments so that we can get that back to the product team. Other things to keep in mind for Image Builder would be permissions. We're going to need a Azure managed identity in order to do some things as part of this whole process, which we'll get into more in a minute. And then one other thing to keep in mind is cost. Now, not as far as the Azure Image Builder service, there's no cost for that as of today, and we'll see what happens with that when it goes generally available, but I mean cost in terms of creating your images. In order to do that, the Image Builder service will be creating resources in Azure as staging resources, building your OS images, and then capturing that. So there will be some cost involved in spinning all that up, but it should generally be minimal. And one last thing to think about here is the generation version of your virtual machines. So Azure has supported Hyper-V Gen 1 VMs for forever, and now we have support for Gen 2 VMs. But keep in mind, if you want to use Gen 2 VMs and have Image Builder create a Gen 2 VM image, you need to have the source for that image come from a Gen 2 VM, either from Hyper-V or the Azure Marketplace. Let's take a quick minute and review the workflow for the image creation process, and if you've done anything like this before, this will be very familiar. And since we're focusing in on WVD as part of this session, I'm only going to really refer to the Windows side of what Azure Image Builder does, but just understand that all the same things apply for all of your Linux workloads. Step one, we need to create an image configuration. This will start off with our source image. In the case of WVD, this would be Windows 10 or Windows Server, and you could get that from an ISO and do it on-prem, or just take one of the images out of the Azure Marketplace. Then we will add customizations, and this is where some of the complexity can come in, because the sky is the limit. You could have configurations, security baselines, registry keys, local policies, applications, basically anything you want can be a customization, but those customizations do need to be in the form of a PowerShell script, and those scripts need to be accessible to the virtual machine that you're building on and the service. There is also a way to do this with resources across your private virtual network, as long as you give the configuration the correct Azure Resource ID. But for our examples today, we'll be pulling our scripts from public GitHub repositories. Also built into the customization section is native support for Windows Update and restarting your virtual machines. And that means when it comes to your monthly servicing, if nothing else is changing besides just loading in your updates, this is going to become a one-click process. Once you've got your configuration defined in the template, that will be submitted to the Image Builder service, where it's going to spin up a pipeline in the background. And what you'll see in the Azure portal is a staging resource group and resources created to do the build and capture process. Which leads us to the last part, and that is the distribution. Once the staging VM is finished, sysprep will run, the VM will be shut down, and then the image capture process will occur. And that VM image will then be imported into the Azure Shared Image Gallery so that it can be replicated to whatever regions you want around the world. And let's spend a minute here on distribution, because WVD can have quite a lot of scale. And that means you need to understand something about custom images in Azure. When you have an image in Azure, you can spin up 20 virtual machines simultaneously from that one image. If you need to spin up more than 20 VMs at once, you basically have to wait. Or we can use a feature in the shared image gallery called replicas. This is where the service will create more copies of that image so that you can spin up as many virtual machines as you need to. Now, this all happens within a single region. So when you want to go out to multiple regions, the image needs to be replicated from the source region to all the other regions. So if, for example, your WVD environment has 3 production regions across the world and 2 disaster recovery regions, you'll easily be able to get your golden master image deployed to all those regions at the same time. Another point to keep in mind is that copying your image from region to region takes time. So my suggestion to you as part of your image pipeline is to deploy to the minimum number of regions possible so that you can finish as quickly as possible. After the process is completed in that primary region and everything looks good, I'll show you an easy way to make multiple replica copies and to replicate it out to all your other regions. So let's start the build phase here by doing the prerequisites. And some of these we're going to do manually so that you can see where all of the moving parts are. But for other ones, like these first ones, we have to do this in PowerShell because there's just no other way to do it yet. And altogether, the prerequisites involve setting up our resource providers, creating a managed identity, creating a custom role in Azure, and then assigning permissions of that role to our identity, then setting up our shared image gallery. So first of all, over here on the right side of the screen, this is where we have our GitHub repo for Azure Image Builder. And it doesn't really matter which of the quick starts or solutions you work with. These prerequisites are the same, so we're just going to run through this screen. And the first thing is to register the resource provider for the feature called Virtual Machine Template Preview. So I'll just paste that here into my Cloud Shell. And since I've registered it already, it comes back almost instantly. So if this is your first time doing it, then it may take a moment. Once you're done with that, you'll want to check these other resource providers and verify that they're all registered. If they're not, then you can just go ahead and run the registration command for it. But most likely they already are because these are very common. Now, before we go on to step 1 here, like I said before, I want to do some of this manually, and then we'll come back and automate it. So in the portal at the top, go ahead and type Manage Identities and select that, and then we want to hit New. And you'll need to select the appropriate subscription and resource group, also your Azure region, and then give your Manage Identity a name. I'll just call mine Image Builder and hit Next. And I've added some tags that are appropriate for my environment so I know what the application this is related to, Azure Image Builder. This is for my lab. I know what my cost center is, so I know who's paying for all of this, who the owner of this resource is, and how to contact them. So you use whatever tags are appropriate in your environment, and you should always be using tags. And so I'll create that resource. And now while that's going, I'm going to go over to my subscriptions and then to access control. So now we're going to create a custom role so that we have the right kind of permissions for our managed identity. So at the top here, we'll hit add, and then we'll go to add custom role. So I'll call my role AIB Image Contributor, and I've added an appropriate description, and we're going to start from scratch and hit next. And we'll click to add our permissions. And then you get all of these boxes, and these are all the different resource providers across Azure that you can pull your permissions from. And you can either click through the boxes to find what you're looking for, or just type it up here at the top. So for example, I want something that's in the compute resource related to galleries. So when I type that, I've only got one box because that's the compute provider. And when I click that, these are all of the permissions related to galleries. And the three permissions we're going to need here are the gallery read, the image read, and the image version read. And then we'll click add, and then we'll go back and add some more permissions. And this time I've typed compute gallery image versions because I just need the right permissions for our versions. We'll hit add for that. And we'll add another permission. This one will be from compute images. And for this one, we're going to need compute images read, write, and delete. So we'll hit add for that. Okay, you should have 7 permissions in all. And then we're going to hit next, and we need a scope. The scope is where these permissions are going to be made available for people to be assigned to them. Now in this case, I only want this at the resource group level where I'm going to be using Image Builder. So I'll remove the subscription here and go to add a scope, and you can scroll down to find the right resource group, which for me happens to be all the way at the bottom. And then we'll hit add for that. So now we have just one scope. So if I look back in access control after this at the subscription level, I won't see this particular role, but I will see it in the resource group. So we'll just create that role, and that'll just take a moment. And at the top here, if we go to roles, and then we narrow this down to just our custom roles, you'll see that that new role I just created does not exist. But if I go back to my resource group, and then back to access control, and look at the roles here, and then filter it down to custom, there is my new role. And of course, we can automate this through a script, which we'll do in a moment. So back in our resource group, there's a cool way that we can assign permissions to the managed identity, and that is by going here to the Azure role assignment. And you can see there's nothing currently here, so we'll hit add at the top. And then we have our scope just like before, so we have to filter down to the resource group, and then select the particular role that we're interested in. And I called mine the AIB Image Contributor. Now, when I click save here, it may not work right away. And that's because of how the providers work and registering the custom roles and all of that. Sometimes it does take a couple minutes before that's available, and it will allow you to assign the permissions. So if you happen to get an error, don't worry about it. Just give it a few minutes and then try again. And sometimes what may even happen is that when you go and assign these permissions, it may not show up immediately. Now, as long as you didn't get an error, don't worry, it's there. It just hasn't shown up in the portal. So just keep hitting refresh and wait a couple minutes, and then you'll be able to see it like I do. And now if we go back to the resource group level to access control and view all of our role assignments, you will see the Azure Image Builder has the role assignment of AIB Contributor, and that's at this resource group level. So now that the managed ID is able to take the images that the image builder will create and put them in the shared image gallery and manage them, we need a shared image gallery. So let's go back to the resource group, and we'll click add at the top. And we'll search for a shared image gallery and go ahead and create that. And you should build this in the same subscription and resource group. Give it a name that matches your naming convention in the same region, and then whatever description you want, like AIB Shared Image Gallery. Hit next, add your tags. And to be consistent, I added all the same tags that I did before and hit create. And those are your prerequisites. You want to register your resource providers, create a managed identity, create a custom role and assign that role to your managed identity, and then create your shared image gallery. So now that you know the steps to get started, let's automate it. So now we're ready to do step number 1, which is to set up our environment and variables. So we'll just copy all of that code and drop it in the Cloud Shell. And then if we go back to the Azure portal, this step has created for us a resource group called WVD Image Demo RG in WestUS 2. And we've also set a couple other variables, so we're ready for the next step. In this next section, we'll create our managed identity for us. Now, one thing that I'll call out that happened to me once in a while is when I ran this first command, this is to get the current date and time in an appropriate format. When I would run that command, and I'll do it right now, and then show you what's in that variable, it's a string of numbers, and that's exactly what it should be. However, sometimes I've seen it return with a string of numbers, a dot, and then a couple other numbers. If that happens to you, you will get an error because that is an invalid naming format for a managed identity. Now, if that happens, don't panic because there's a real easy way to fix it with PowerShell. So you go back to the original command, and then what we need to do is we need to do a split. So we're going to add another set of parentheses here, and then inside the last parenthesis, we'll type .split. And when you do a split, you need to tell it what it is that it's going to be the indicator of where things split. In this case, we'll use that period. So we need another set of parentheses, and in there put a single quote, period, single quote. That'll give you two values, the part before the period and the part after the period. So we need just that first part, which you can select with a square bracket, 0, square bracket. Okay, so if you run into that problem, just modify your code that way and you will be golden. In this case, however, we are just fine. So I'm going to run this block of code. And like I said, this is going to create that managed identity for us. It's also going to download a couple PowerShell modules for the image builder so that we can assign all of our permissions correctly. Now, you may get this message also about an untrusted repository, because for those PowerShell modules, we have to get them from somewhere, and that somewhere is the PowerShell gallery. So if you've never registered that as a trusted provider, you'll get this message, and you can just hit yes or yes to all, and then that'll download and set up our modules. And the last command will be to create our managed identity, and then from that identity, we'll set up a couple other variables for the ID and the principal ID, because that's how we're going to assign permissions to it in just a second. So I'll just clear the screen here and we can move on to the third block. And now we're ready to assign permissions to our new managed identity. So let me copy these first couple lines and we'll run that. And when we do a ls, we can see that the file has been downloaded to our local file system. So if I can cat that file, it looks exactly like all the permissions that we assigned manually a few moments ago. So now we need to update the contents of this file to have our proper scope as well as the proper name for our role definitions. Let me clear the screen here. And we'll run these next lines, which are going to do all of that work. And then once that's done, we can cat our file again. And there we go. We've changed our scope and the image definition name. So now we are ready to create a new role definition, copy and execute that. That's good. So now we should be able to add our new role assignment. So I'll clear the screen again and we'll run that. And again, if you happen to see an error saying that the role assignment does not exist, just give it a couple minutes and then try it again because it just hasn't processed everything yet. And there we go, that's all successful now. And so now we can go and create our shared image gallery, which we'll just copy and execute all this code, and we'll just paste that. Now, while that is going, the last command here goes and creates an image definition, which is something that we did not do manually. And a definition is the kind of the wrapper that goes around the image that you need in order to use the shared image gallery. There you go, our gallery is now created, and it'll take just a moment to create our image definition. While it is doing that, let's take a look at creating our image templates. So now in setting up our image templates, of course, we're working with WVD, so that means Windows 10 for most of us. And we, of course, have multiple options like Windows 10 multi-session or Windows 10 Enterprise, which would be single session. So if you're working with a pooled host pool, like most of you are, then you'll want to make sure that this is what you're referencing as your image source. And I'll show you where that is exactly in just a second. And if you're using a different thing like Windows Server, then of course you're going to want to make sure you have those values in here. Now, if you want to find what images are available in your particular region, we can run this next command, and that'll show you all the different SKUs of the image that are available in your particular region. Okay, like you can see here that this SKU for Windows 10 multi-session is 20H2-EVD, and that is right up here. And that's how you can find and build these things through PowerShell, or what you could do is just go to any one of your virtual machines. And then from your virtual machine over here on the top right, you want to click the JSON view. And if you look at the storage profile, that'll have the exact information that we're looking for. So while we're here in the portal, let's look at what we've done through PowerShell. We've created this new resource group, WVD Image Demo RG. There's our new managed ID, and when we go to there, we've got our role assignment, and that's from that custom role that we created, image builder definition with a number. Back in the resource group, here's our shared image gallery, and we have an image definition. And you can see the image definition here inside the shared image gallery. And when you go into the definition, this is where we will have our image versions. And we're going to create that image version from this template file, and we'll just download that. And there you can see is our template file. So let's cat that. And this is a normal standard ARM template. So you've got your parameters section here at the top. And then we have our resource, which in this case is a virtual machine image template. And it's got some of your typical stuff here like an API version, location, and tags. It also has a managed identity, which is the one that we created earlier. And then it has properties. So the first one here I want to tell you about is the VM profile. This is the size of the virtual machine that AIB is going to spin up to do your image. And this is part of where that cost comes from that I mentioned in the beginning. Now, keep in mind that this virtual machine will only be alive long enough to create your image and then capture it. And you could use any virtual machine SKU here, but the important thing to note is that whatever it is that you're doing, as part of all the customizations, which we'll look at in a second, you need to have enough resources on that virtual machine to do the job. So if, for example, you're installing a bunch of applications and scripts and things, and you need to have 4 CPU cores and 16 gigs of RAM, then this particular VM size is not going to cut it. So just go ahead and edit that in your template, and you get the appropriate VM size. And then we have the source that we referenced earlier. Now for source, we've got a couple options. This particular code is pulling from one of the Azure Marketplace images. Now, if you're using a different custom image that you already have created on premise, you're going to need to upload that into Azure into a storage account, deploy a virtual machine from that virtual hard drive file, and capture that as an Azure managed image, because we would need the image ID, which you would put here instead of all of this stuff. Now, this particular file does have an older version of Windows 10, so I want to modify that. So I'll click up here at the top to open the editor, and then I'll load up my ARM template file here. And this is basically running VS Code in your Cloud Shell. So let me scroll down. And so I've changed that to 20H2 EVD, changed my VM size while I was here to B2MS. I like that size. It's got 2 CPU core and 8 gig of RAM, and it's burstable. And then if you're using a custom image, you can also alter the size of the OS disk. But if you're pulling from a marketplace image, then just leave that at 127. And I'll just clear my screen and cat the file again. Now I'm going to skip past the customizations for now and come back to it in just a second, because at the end here we have the distribute section, and that's where we're sending our image to the shared image gallery to a particular image definition of the Win10 WVD that we just created through our script. And then we have our replication regions. Now by default, you need to have this in the region where your shared image gallery lives, but we could also add, if we wanted to, the other regions that we want our image ultimately to be in. In the example I gave earlier, we had 5 regions. And you can do that, but I would suggest that you don't, because again, it will take time to replicate to all of those regions, and so you won't know that everything is done and worked perfectly before you replicate it out. So if something happened to go wrong, then you'd have to delete all those other images and replicas. So it's easier and faster, in my opinion, to just do this to one region and then replicate them after all of that is done, which we'll get into in a minute. Let's get back to this customize section, because this is where all the magic really happens. So we've taken our source image and deployed a new VM from it. Now we're going to take all of these different commands, PowerShell code, etc., and then run that against that virtual machine. And so we could literally do anything here. So for example, we have optimizing the OS from the virtual desktop team. And if we open this code and take a look, here's the PowerShell that it's actually going to run. So we're setting up some variables here for the environment, then referencing the desktop optimization tool that we're going to download as a zip. Expand all of the files in that zip, do a couple more things, and then execute the optimization script. So again, your PowerShell could literally do anything. Now, when it comes to some of the other things here, like Windows Restart, that's a native feature inside the image builder. So you'd want to call that a type of Windows restart. And then there's a comment here writing out to the screen so you know what's going on in your logs. And you've got a timeout here for the restart. So if we scroll down a little more, we've also got Windows Update as a native feature. And this is set for a update limit of 40 updates. Now again, if you're deploying updated images frequently, then that should be no problem. So now we're going to submit our image for creating our template, and that'll be just the standard resource group deployment. So we'll paste that code. And so this is going to create our image template, which is a new kind of resource. And back in the Azure portal, if we refresh, now we have an image template. So there's a couple things to point out here in this new resource. One is that there is our SKU. This is our source image and what we're pulling from. We'll also be able to see the build state and whatever the current message is from the image builder. We've got our distribution point, and that's our shared image gallery. You can also kick off your build or stop your build from up here. Then we also have our JSON view, and this is the exact ARM template that we uploaded a little while ago, where we're pulling the source image from, as well as all of our customizations that are going to do the work. And so our next thing is to build our VM image, and that'll be done with a new PowerShell command. This is start AZ image builder template, referencing the particular resource group and the particular image template file. So let's drop that here in our Cloud Shell and kick it off. And right away, our cursor is returned to us. And that's really nice because what we're going to be able to do now is run some other PowerShell to check on the status. So we're taking the getAZ image builder template that we just kicked off and putting that in the variable $getStatus. So to make it a little bit easier for you to see all the status here in PowerShell, $getStatus dot last run status run state. That'll tell you if we are running or if we're failed. Then there is the last run status message. Now we saw this a moment ago inside the template code. So let me pull that up so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's the customization for Windows Restart. You can see that it has a check command of write host restarting post teams install. That would be one of the status messages that you would see. And then we have the last run sub state, and that tells you which step in the process it's currently doing. And we'll just run this entire section again, and you do have to run it all again so that you can refresh the data that's in the get status variable. And so our current status is that it's running and it is building. So if we go back to the Azure portal, let me full screen this guy, and we hit refresh up here at the top, you can see the status is running and building. And there is no message currently, but when we get to something in the build process, like after that Teams install, when there's the reboot, you'll see a status message for that. So back in our resource groups, we've got our WVD image demo resource group that we've been working with. And now we've got a new one with a IT underscore and then the same name of the resource group. So if we open that up, this is our staging resource group. And we can see that there is currently a deployment that's going on and we've got a bunch of resources spinning up. So of course, the next big question is, how long will all of this take? Well, as usual, it depends. It depends first on your source image. How big was that image? Because we have files that we have to transfer. Then there are all of the customization steps. You are not limited in the number of customizations that you can have. So if, for example, you wanted to run 50 scripts and install 20 applications, you can do that. And that will all take some amount of time. Once all of that is done, again, it will depend on how many reboots you have and then capturing the image. And as far as the capturing that image, uploading it into the gallery for your very first replica in your very first region, that will happen relatively quickly. So for me, pulling an image from the Azure Marketplace, doing these particular customizations of installing and setting up FSLogix, the Windows 10 optimization script, and installing Teams with 2 reboots and running Windows Update, this will take about 45 minutes or so for it to run. But through the magic of Azure, I'll take you through a time warp and we're done. There you go, our image has finished building and we've got our last run state here as succeeded. So if we take a look back at our resource group, we've got a new item here and this is our image version, which you can either click on directly or go through the shared image gallery. And we'll click on our image definition and there is our version. So in our version at the top here, you can deploy a virtual machine directly or a virtual machine scale set. And if we go over here on the left to update replication, you'll see that our one region of West US 2 has completed and there is one replica. So now if we need multiple replicas in WestUS 2, we can just change this number. Say for example, we need 10 replicas, and I've added all the other regions that I need to support for this deployment, as well as all of the replica counts that I need in each of those regions. And then you just have to hit save and just wait for the replication. Take another look back at our repository, because there are also some cleanup steps if you're done with Azure Image Builder. And you can remove your templates and clean up your role assignments and delete the resource group. And the cleanup steps here are completely optional and up to you and how you want to work, because you may want to have these things sitting around from month to month. It just makes the deployment and update process a little bit easier. And let me give you just a quick tour around this GitHub repo that we've been looking at. So this is the main repo page of the Image Builder. If we go to Solutions, we'll see number 14 here, building a WVD image, and that's the repo that we've been directly working from in this session. Notice right underneath that is Azure DevOps. So there is a Azure DevOps extension for Azure Image Builder, so it'll integrate directly with your build and release pipelines. So I've created a new Azure DevOps project, and I'll go up here to the marketplace and go to Browse, and I'll just search for the Azure Image Builder. And we've got two items here. This second one is a pre-release version if you want to see the very latest things, but I'll just go with the current version, and we'll get that for free and install that into my DevOps. And in that DevOps repo, we can go to the build pipeline, and then we can scroll down quite a ways because we've done all of these prerequisites in our beginning steps manually. And you can pick it up right here with create a DevOps project if you need to do those steps. Once your project is created, we can go over here to our repos, and then at the bottom here, click Initialize. And just to save some time, I uploaded the same files from the WVD repo we were working with earlier, and then you would go and create a release pipeline. So under the pipeline section here, we'll just go to Releases, create a new pipeline, and then we want to start from an empty job, and then just give your stage a name. I'll just call mine AIB and hit Save. You would load up your artifacts from your Azure repo by just selecting your project, and then your source, which would just be the repo itself. Select whatever branch you want to work with. Main branch is the only one that I have because I just created it, and you hit Add. So that'll ingest all of the files that are in our repo. And then here you want to click on the job task, and under the agent job, go ahead and click the plus, and then search here for Image Builder. And then we'll add that, and that's the extension that we added just a moment ago. Then we just need to fill out the job. So in this first section is where you set up the subscription that you want to authorize your DevOps repo to work with, and where your resource group and region are to deploy your VMs and your image. The managed identity section, we need to grab the resource ID of our managed identity that we created, and then just paste that in here. For our source, I'm going to pull from the Azure Marketplace, a Windows 10 multi-session version, and pulling the latest of the image revisions. Under the Customize section for Windows, you of course want this to be PowerShell, and you can choose to run Windows Update right here in the process. The build path is where you can reference the repo that we created earlier, and just by selecting this folder, I'm going to ingest all three of our files. And then you just need to have the inline script to run them. Now the files are going to be downloaded to the C drive build artifacts folder, so just reference them from there, and you can either reference them individually or create one master script file to rule them all. Then we have to call out a storage account where we're going to have all of our logs and that VHD file that we're going to eventually create. And under the distribute section, we're going to go to the shared image gallery. So you need to put the resource ID for that and what regions you want to have your image replicated to. And the last thing that you need to do here is just set your VM size if you want to do that. Like I changed mine to B2MS. Hit save at the top, and now you've created a pipeline. So all you have to do is create the release and then just wait for the process to finish. So as you can see, there is an absolute ton of things that you can do with the Azure Image Builder. And I've only scratched the surface. There's a lot more that you could dig into in the repo. And you can also make your own custom solutions. And this is only going to get better over time. So your feedback is definitely needed to improve everything. So what can you do next? Well, of course, you can subscribe and click the like button, share my videos with everybody else so that they can learn more about Azure, and also check out the latest video up here on the Azure Academy. And don't forget about this one, which is our playlist to the AZ 140 study guide, so you can master everything about WVD, and also, if you want to, get ready for that certification and go pass the test. Thanks for joining me today, and I will catch you in our next episode. Happy learning.